operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the 2024 Florida Gators defense, and I'm going to tell you why I believe it's going to be better than it's been the last few years. Before we get into it, I do want to thank everyone who has checked out the channel and our 2024 offense preview. If you have not, go ahead and check that one out as well, but it is the most watched and listened to episode that I've ever done. So thank you everyone who checked it out. Thank you everyone who shared it, liked it. Any new subscribers, thank you for coming on. If you enjoy this video or audio, if you are listening on anywhere you get your podcast, feel free to subscribe. Thank you for subscribing. Like it if you're watching on YouTube. It really helps. But again, thank you so much for everyone who checked us out. With that said, let's go ahead and get into the defense. And the defense really should be a little bit different this year. And part of that is staff changes that happened. After the end of the season last year, Corey Raymond and Coach Chaos, the defensive line coach, they were let go. Raymond ended up back at LSU, Coach Chaos at Texas A&M. But we brought in Coach Harris and Coach Chapman to replace them. Harris for the defensive backs, Chapman for the defensive linemen. And with that said, Harris came from the NFL where he is an assistant defensive back coach. Before that, he had some very successful defensive back units at the University of Washington for the Huskies, where he's also brought over Asa Turner, and we'll talk about him a little bit later, where he's familiar. And again, had some very successful units. Chapman comes over from Tulane, where he had been for a few years, but in between he had to stop as like the interim LSU defensive line coach last spring. So he's been around, got experience a few different places as well before heading to Gainesville. But probably the biggest change after, the coaching carousel stopped spinning last year, Jay Bateman, our linebacker coach, ended up taking the defensive coordinator job at Texas A&M under head coach Mike Elko. That opened up a spot that was actually pretty valuable to us because it allowed us to take Ron Roberts from Auburn, who was their co-DC or DC last year, and bring him in as a co-DC at Florida. And he's had some good units before that. He was at Baylor. Before Baylor, he spent time with Billy Napier at Louisiana. Last year had Auburn in year one of the Hugh Freeze era at number 45 in the nation. The Florida Gators defense hasn't been top 50 in at least 4 or 5 years. So if he can improve our unit that much, that's going to help this team a whole heck of a lot. But those are the coaching changes that we've seen. And also one last thing about Ron Roberts and his change over to UF is that he's been brought in as co-DC to kind of help mentor a young Austin Armstrong, who is the youngest coordinator in the SEC, and bring him along, help say, this idea is great, here's maybe how we can tweak it, and also just help out with his experience. And one thing I think Ron Roberts' experience brings as well is a big way to address tackling. And tackling, if you go back to 2020 to now, has been one of the Gators' biggest issues. I was talking with some podcasters from another school recently, and they asked, what are some things that can improve this defense? And I said, A, pass rush, and then I had to remember, now B's probably bigger than that's tackling, because there are times, 2022 FSU game comes to mind where your pass rush gets there, but then they don't make the tackle and end the threat. And then the example from 2022 FSU, twice Jordan Travis evades like 5 tackles, gets down inside the one where they would have a long field goal had we just made the tackle. And of course, last year, KJ Jefferson, big moment, Princely man gets into the backfield, hits KJ Jefferson, doesn't wrap up, doesn't tackle, and they end up going on to tie the game, and ultimately Florida loses that game. But had we wrapped up and tackled, we probably win that game. So those are things that I see being brought over from Auburn and elsewhere for Ron Roberts, and where he helps, and also where Coach Harris and Coach Chapman are going to help. And another thing that's going to help is we return a ton of production. We also had transfer in a ton of production, and we'll get into that as we talk about each position group. The first position group that we're going to talk about is the defensive line. And for those of you not sure, I do include the jack outside linebacker, type deal as a defensive lineman, because it is kind of a hybrid stand-up outside linebacker, but also kind of a defensive end type deal. So because of that, that's kind of where I put that hybrid position, just so when we go through, you understand, oh yeah, this is what this position is for me. But with that said, we're going to start at defensive end, where we do have a big return, in my opinion, and that is Justice Boone. Justice Boone missed last year with a leg injury, had to sit out for the season, comes back, has the number 1 jersey. This is a guy who is already a big guy, like size-wise on the defensive line, and now he's going to hopefully take that next step to be a big guy on the defensive end spot. We also have Tyreek Sapp, who is another big guy in that spot who can help out, and the two of them are already good depth there. But on top of that, you have the top defensive lineman from the 2024 class, a young guy by the name of L.J. McCray. Very nice guy. Got to meet him a few weeks ago. Very, very nice. And also made some big plays in the spring game. And with more time in the system, with more experience, he's only going to be better. So that defensive end position is going to be a deep one, and an experienced one, and definitely a talented one. Now, again, just hope they can continue to wrap up and cause havoc. At the nose tackle, unfortunately, last week we did lose Lyons, who was supposed to bring some depth. However, we still have some good returning experience there and some big bodies there. Cam Jackson, who last year transferred in from Memphis, dude, this year comes in, has more experience, second year in the system, hopefully a little bit better coaching to his style with Coach Chapman, and also just a little bit of improvement in the scheme with Ron Roberts. And you've got a guy who's in his 5th year, I believe, of college football. And yep, fifth year. Had to double check my notes. And behind him, a 4th-year guy in Big Dez, a big guy that does eat up blockers in space. Hopefully this year, with the new strength and conditioning program, Big Dez is able to contribute a little bit more, able to go 100% another few snaps, especially with the loss of a guy, like a Jamari Lyons, who may not have come in and be the most dominant nose tackle, but a guy who helps the rotation, a guy with guys who are, 350, 400 pounds, someone who can come in and just eat a few snaps, give a few snaps of rest is important. But I also wouldn't be shocked to see some of our defensive tackles move over to that position as well if we needed them to. With that said, we're going to go and talk about the defensive tackles real quick. And the first defensive tackle I want to talk about is Joey Slackman, who did transfer to us from Princeton. I say Princeton, it was Penn, my bad, from the Ivy League. Definitely for 2 years caused havoc in the Ivy League. Started off as a collegiate wrestler. Very exciting to have him. The one question that I do have is that he was very great in the Ivy League, but the competition level between the Ivy League and the SEC is immense. Hopefully he comes in and does play well with that SEC level. All indications are he's done so far so well during camp. So I'm hoping that he continues to do that, build and grow. Very nice guy. Got to talk to him after the spring game during the autograph signing. Asked him if he's the smartest player on the team. Humbly said, I'm not sure about that. But I mean, the guy went to Ivy League, may or may not be, but very nice guy. And hopefully he's as good as he is smart. And with that said, also at defensive tackle, a guy who transferred in last year from Louisville who did not have too much experience at Louisville before playing a lot last year for us, and that's Caleb Banks. Also a great guy who I got to talk to a little bit after that, got to talk to a few guys, but he did pretty well last year. And again, a second year at Florida, a second year of getting a ton of playing time. That's a lot of experience now to build on. Last year, we talked about youth. We talked about how young and inexperienced the defense was. Well, this year, that's not an excuse. There's so much more experience. In fact, I ran the numbers. This is probably a good time to say it. And per the 11 starters have 11 or 9 more years of experience than the 11 starters listed in the 2008 national championship game, just as far as years of college are concerned, or years playing football in college. And the reason why I say years playing football is Joey Slackman, I only counted 3 rather than what you would normally think with a grad transfer of 4 or 5. And that's not to say maybe they're as talented as that 08 defense because that was legendary, but just saying youth and experience per man. This group has more experience, but I could see Caleb Banks, going back to him, possibly be one of the guys who does take some snaps at nose tackle just to help out with the depth there, because behind them they have Kelby Collins, who again played pretty well last year as a true freshman, coming in and getting some experience and playing through that for this defense. And now this year, again, going through the brand new strength and conditioning program, second year in the system. You got the little bit of changes that Chapman and Ron Roberts bring. So you're hoping that can just take them to the next level. And then moving to the jack position, the, hybrid in outside linebacker type deal, used to be called F. It's been called all sorts of things. Buck is another, I think that was Will Muschamp's name for it. Starter, I believe, will be TJ Searcy, who had a great year, in my opinion, for a true freshman. Definitely caused a lot of chaos, even though sometimes you look at the stats and the stats say, oh, maybe he didn't do quite as well. Well, no, sometimes it's about causing havoc, causing problems. And now in year 2, you want to see those stats go up. And definitely last year, as far as the front half for the true freshman of the defense, I do believe he was the MVP for true freshman. Comes in again, like I've said before, you get the, better offseason strength and conditioning. You get all the other things. I think he has a jump this year as well. Backing him up, there's been a lot of talk of George Gums, who's a guy who transferred from Northern Illinois. And so I really hope that his experience there pays off in the SEC. I've heard, through various podcasts and also just saying things on Twitter, several people talk to him that he's a guy that's really coming in under the radar. And then Cameron James is another one of those talented young guys who last year as a true freshman got some reps. I look to see him get more this year. And I mean, we're talking like every position. I'm talking 2-3 deep. So I do think with that depth, with that experience that was gained last year, this could be the best defensive line we've seen in a while. Definitely one of the deepest. And another name at that jack position I've not even talked about yet is Jack Pyburn, who I think could also play the defensive end position needed, who's a very big dude. And every time I've talked to him, a very nice dude as well, a guy you want to cheer for. And I definitely do not want to leave him out because he's got 3 years of experience coming in here, and I cannot wait to see what this defensive line and this group can do when we've seen these changes. Before we get to the linebackers, I do want to give a shout out to my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company. Alvarez Lawn Company, hey, if you're in Central Florida, you got a lawn project you need done, you don't want to, mow your yard because it's hot outside, or you want to totally landscape your yard into an entirely different look. If you'd like to try that, and again, you're in the Central Florida area, give my friends at Alvarez Lawn Company a call or even text them for a free quote at 407-490-2617. You can also email them at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Once again, Alvarez Lawn Company will give you a free quote. Just give them a call or text at 407-490-2617. or give them an email at alvarezlawncompany@gmail.com. Alvarez Lawn Company, building plans that work for you. We're going to go ahead now and move to the linebacker position. And with the linebacker position, I really think this is a group that could surprise. Last year, a few years now, our linebackers have been iffy. This year, I do think we've brought in some good talent, and also we've developed some good talent. The first name I want to give out is Shamar James. Started here as a true freshman, last year as a true sophomore, played a lot before getting injured, and then finally having to go out, in that back half of the season. And unfortunately, with him not being able to play, it did also hurt this defense quite a bit. Your linebackers are, especially your middle linebacker, are known as the quarterback of your defense, and it did hurt an already hurting defense to have him go out. But he's returned from the dislocated kneecap that took him out, and I do believe year 3, this is his time. You also have the new coaching, whether it ends up being Armstrong doing the linebackers or Roberts doing the linebackers or both. I think it's just a new way, plus a little bit of scheme changes we might see. I do think that's something that we're going to see. And then the other starting linebacker, Pup Howard, last year got some great experience playing up at South Carolina a little bit. And the year before was one of the top linebacker recruits in the nation. One thing that Billy Napier does well is build relationships. And so when guys are like, I'm not sure if I want to be here anymore, Billy does take advantage of that. And Pup Howard's a good example. Pup Howard was at South Carolina, was like, I don't know if I want to be up here. So, of course, he comes over, and now he's probably going to be the second starting linebacker for the Gators this year. And everything that I've seen and heard is he's going to be really good for us here. He looked good in the spring game. And again, that's the spring. Now we've got summer, fall workouts, probably taking him up to a little bit higher level as he's gotten more familiar with his teammates, as he's gotten more familiar with the system. So the two of them are going to do well. Another guy is Jaden Robinson. Was here last year, didn't play too much, but like Pup Howard, was a highly, highly recruited linebacker in the class of 2023. Now that he's been here for a year, gone through another spring, gone through the summer, I think he can be more than a capable backup and a role guy. Another guy to talk about, Derek Wingo, been here since 2020, has been here for all the bad defenses, and there's at least one more name I'll bring up who's been here. And this is a guy who's desiring to see the change and help bring about the change from what the Gators defense has been to what it should be and where the Gators should be. If nothing else, Derek Wingo brings the experience and he brings that mentorship. I've talked about how last year, and you can see it I believe it's in my intro, you can see one of my favorite moments from last year, and that's Derek Wingo leading the band in the fight song after the win at South Carolina, a guy who's come, given it all for his program, and that's really what you want to see a lot. And then alongside that, we've got two very big-time recruits that have come in as linebackers who I do think will get some run and may even end up being that second string spot. And hopefully there's no injuries, but if there's injuries, they may end up starting. And that's Miles Graham, the son of Gator great Ernest Graham, and Aaron Childs. Both of these guys have been on campus. Both of these guys, have been learning this system. And both of these guys want to also be that change and be part of the group that changes it. So, and everything I've seen is high praise for these two. So it'll be very interesting. And again, we're talking linebacker positions, 2-3 deep. And I'm not just throwing out some random name. I'm not throwing out a former 2-star, and I won't say that name, but that's what we were doing several years ago. We're like, hey, this former 2-star, they'll put it together. No, now we're talking about guys who are all 4, 5-star recruits, highly recruited linebackers coming into Florida, and guys with experience like a Shamar James, who's now in his 3rd year of starting at Florida, a Pup Howard, who's been in another program. He's been here. He's played in the SEC. A guy like Derek Wingo, who, again, has that mentorship, who's been around and can say, here's where it's been. Let's not be there. Let's do this together. Definitely a lot of good things happening in that linebacker room, and I cannot wait to see it, especially if we do see the improvement in tackling, and especially if we do see just a little bit of changes in the scheme from things that Roberts has seen successful. I know that sounds like a broken record, but again, just like me with Callaway and the offense, I do think just a little bit of changes could make a whole lot of difference. And before we move on to the defensive backs, I do want to give my friends at Gator Chatter a shout out. Gator Chatter, your Florida Gator sports bar. If you have not checked out our Huddle Up Gator episodes, especially Aaron Bland, who is the owner and operator of GatorChatter.com. Gator Chatter is a message board. They have been together for years. Lots of fun, guys. In many ways does feel like a family. You can say, positive things if you want, unlike some places that if you feel like you have to be negative, they'll allow it, and everywhere in between. But Gator Chatter is a good group of guys. I've met quite a few in person, and of course have friends like Aaron Bland. Check out that Huddle Up Gators episode if you have the time. But with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our defensive backs. And this is one group that I'm really, really excited about. And I compared earlier the number of, years experience with our starters with that 2008 squad, as far as saying experience is not our issue. Other things maybe, and it's really evident in the defensive backs. 2008, you had a true freshman and 3 second-year players. Maybe they're all sophomores. One may have been a redshirt freshman. Either way, at one corner, we've got a 4th-year starter in Jason Marshall. Did have a rough year last year, but in my season preview last year, I did talk about how the first 2 years, the passer rating against him was actually lower than if someone had just spiked the ball each play, and I do believe that quote was lifted from Pro Football Focus. Again, last year definitely took a step back, but this is a year of redemption for him. Last year, I think, was a wake-up call about what he needed to improve upon, especially a guy who is looking at possibly top 3 rounds draft pick and then has a year like that, comes back. Really hope that he takes it to the next level, and I believe he can. Again, you have Harris coming in, who is known for making a difference and having great, I believe it was even a top 5 pass unit his last year at Washington. So you've got a guy like Marshall who has all that experience, has all that talent. Now it's time to put it all together and have it be a money year. Opposite him at corner, you've got a 3rd-year guy in Devin Moore. Now, Devin Moore seems snake bit, unfortunately, keeps getting injured. And when I was asked, what's the defensive position group that you're most worried about, I believe it was on Texas podcast, and it could have been on Mississippi State as well. My dogs are barking. If you want to go check that out, that's the name of the Mississippi State podcast I did a guest spot on. And I said the defensive backfield, and one reason I said that is a lot of these guys do not have experience with each other. But again, I expect Coach Harris to put that together. But also you have things like Devin Moore, who unfortunately has had problems staying healthy and is actually currently out right now. Should be ready to go with the Miami game, but with an illness. But it's just one of those things that it just happens. Currently at the start, it sounds like Sharif Denson may be the starter. Of course, Aaron Gates, another highly recruited guy who didn't play much last year, is giving him a run for that position. Denson, from what I've seen and what little he's played, and also in spring games, does look like a guy who's not afraid to come up and make tackles. So that's something that we've been desiring out of our star position, and something I hope we continue to see. Jordan Castell, very admirable job as a true freshman safety in the SEC last year. Again, now he's got a full year under his belt. He's got, a whole new spring, a different defensive back coach. He's got, tweaks in the system. And one thing I want to say for this defensive backfield also is they've got this defensive line. So if this defensive line can generate more of a pass rush, that's going to help out DBs like a younger Sharif Denson, who's in his second year, or Jordan Castell in his second year, because quarterbacks are going to have to hurry up their throws more, which leads to sometimes more inaccurate throws. Or, if you're in man-to-man coverage, you have less time to lose your guy or less time for something to happen. All sorts of things. But with that said, Castell, very good to have back that experience. And speaking of experience, the other projected starter at safety, Asa Turner, who's come over from Washington, and I said before, has experience with Harris from his first few years, started in the national championship game last year. Of course, Kalen DeBoer ends up moving. The coach of Washington ends up being hired at Alabama to replace Nick Saban. Turner's like, you know what? If he's leaving, I don't want to deal with a third coach at Washington during my time here. I'll go ahead. If I'm going to have a new coach, let me pick the program. Comes over with Harris, had an amazing diving breakup in the spring game, and from what I've understood, has continued to build on that through fall camp so far. I'm excited to see him. He definitely got to talk to him as well after the spring game. Asked him what he thought about Florida, and the heat was definitely something he was getting used to. And now he's got a 3:30 kick, first game of the season against Miami. So good for him to come in and, do what hopefully he'll do, and that's be a great safety and also a great mentor to all the young DBs in the room. And I've done the DBs a little bit differently, and that's by going through and saying all the starters first. And now we're talking about some of the backups at corner. We're talking Jakeem Jackson, who did have experience last year, some good and bad experiences. There are times he looked good, and then there are times like FSU's first scoring drive where unfortunately he let a big pass through. But again, that's part of being a true freshman. That's part of, making mistakes and learning. Without mistakes, sometimes we don't reach our full potential. And so I really expect him to step up this year, especially with the better coaching around him. And again, things like going through a better strength and conditioning program. Behind Devin Moore, Dijon Johnson, who again, high recruit from the 2023 recruiting cycle, was here last year, now has a chance to come in, get plenty of reps, learn. And unfortunately, if Moore goes down, he's going to have a chance to show what he's worth as well. And I do have confidence in him. Again, very high recruits we're talking about in this two deep. Behind Denson, we've talked about how he and Aaron Gates have gone back and forth, although I think Denson does end up getting the starting nod. Gates, again, being here a year, I do think he's going to give us plenty of depth and get plenty of run at that star position. And hopefully with that star position, both those guys can do better than some of the others we've seen here that have just basically been, where's the star? Okay, here's where we're throwing the ball. Bryce Thornton, true freshman last year, will probably be backing up Jordan Castell. And, last year, again, learning on the job as a true freshman, coming through. Expect him to be even better this year because of his experience last year. And then behind Asa Turner is DJ Douglas, a guy who I really, really respect because if you don't know his story, started off as a walk-on at Alabama, did well enough, worked hard enough where he got a scholarship position at Tulane. Played on some great Tulane teams. 2 years ago, they're beating USC in a New Year's Six Bowl. Last year, had another great run of it, gave Ole Miss a run for a while, and now he's earned himself. He's gone from SEC walk-on to now an SEC scholarship player. So definitely can't wait, and hopefully he does well. Again, players you want to cheer for, someone like that is definitely someone I'd like to cheer for. And then going either between the strong safety or free safety position, we could see I'm going to mess this up, Kwesi Bridges, transfer from Oregon. And again, another guy brought in for depth, a guy with lots of experience as well. I believe he's been in the game for 5 years. He's a transfer senior. And again, a guy that can just help say, here's experience at a great program like Oregon with a great defensive mind like Dan Lanning. Here are things I've learned. Here are some tips. And sometimes guys can help bring those tips and bring that mentorship, even if they don't end up starting or whatnot, and can help improve the younger guys and the play of those around them. So that's the defense. I really do think it's going to be better. The key to it is just getting out there, playing, and of course, tackling, because tackling has been that issue for us for several years now. But with that said, again, thank you everyone who has checked us out. Thank you everyone who has shared. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button on YouTube. If you've also enjoyed it, I do hope to get up to 250 subscribers by the time we kick off the season against Miami on August 31st. So hit that subscribe button if you've not. Tell your friends about us. And with that said, thank you all for listening. And as always, go Gators.